Hi everyone. I thought I'd start a few minutes early just because I've been getting a lot of questions about the ethics exam. So I thought I'd just quickly go over the ethics before we start at 6 for DCT. So it's nice to see so many comments already and familiar names. So welcome, welcome. And yes, it is nearly your final exam. But right, ethics. Now, I thought the ethics paper was all right, mainly because I predicted most of it were hey, but I know the questions were worded weird. So from all the comments I've been receiving, though, what you've been putting seems really good, seems accurate. It looks like you've really taken questions apart. Utilitarianism was a tricky question. The utilitarianism with specific business, that was tricky, but it's not out of your capabilities. So I wouldn't worry about ethics now at all. The exam board did throw in those curveballs of most important. They've not used words like that before. But again, if you focused on them, even if you said it was the most important or it wasn't most important, brilliant. You will get marks for your line of argument. So do not panic about your ethics. But it was, the topic areas were nice then, fair enough. The questions were a little bit tricky. So we need to be prepared that tomorrow's questions might also be a little bit on the tricky side. Yeah, I think with the ethics, I think the thing with ethics, and it's the same for DCT. This is because we're about to start anyway, so I think it's important to mention now all topics, even if the question is very specific. What I was trying to explain is that they're not the parts of the topic are all different avenues. So you don't, for example, like with Kant, you didn't have duty and goodwill and moral law and all them as separate avenues. They're on the same track with different stops. So it's the same with your DCT coming up. If you get a very specific question, which you might do on Bonhoeffer, for example, and discipleship, you don't just think, oh, it's just discipleship. No, it's how discipleship links to everything else. So it might be worded quite narrow, but it means you still need to talk about everything else as well and make everything else relevant and fit. But we are 6 o'clock, so we will get cracking. And while I remember, I've had a nice student say that they want me to do a call out to their teacher, Mrs. Hardcastle, for being an amazing teacher. So just before I forget, so thank you for that message there from that student. Right, so DCT is very, very difficult to predict, first of all. I know I've been lucky so far, but the exam board, OCR, often do curveballs where they ask the same topic year after year. They did it with Bonhoeffer. They asked Bonhoeffer, I think, 3 or 4 years running, which means that, yes, Augustine came up last year. We can't cross off that Augustine might not come up this year. Yes, liberation and Marxism came up last year. It might come on this year. So my predictions are based on topics that didn't come on and where the obvious gaps are. So that's where my predictions fall. As far as what I think it could be. But with DCT, you do need to know quite a bit of everything. But as some of your comments have been saying, DCT, you can really talk about anything and everything. This is your last exam for most of you. This is your time to shine. You don't have to. Philosophy is very constrained within certain philosophers and critics. Ethics, you've got to stay within the constraints of the structure of the argument. DCT is a free for all. Talk about anything and everything. So I got a question very early on about how many names do you need to bring in? The more the merrier. You can talk about everything holistically. Bring in so many different arguments from so many different places. Just don't forget, if you bring in an argument, link it back to the question, why is it relevant? Why are you bringing them in? Why are you bringing in Aquinas's conscience, for example, in a person of Jesus or whatever it might be? That's not a very good link. But why are you doing that? And then don't forget, just because you put names in it doesn't mean that you evaluated. You have to then evaluate their credit. Why are they there? Why are they valid? Why are they reliable? Why are they worth being in your essay? But you really can run with DCT. answers, and they give marks for so many different avenues. The main thing, and this is the hardest thing with DCT, is you have to argue something. That's really hard. You need to argue something. So get a line of argument as quick as you can and just go to town on it. Bring in as many arguments as you can for and against it, and just bring in references. If you can drop in a quote from the Pope, a Catholic document, a Bible quote, you're a winner. That's what you need. So key things for tonight to do with your last minute revision, because obviously your exams in the morning, is to know know a quote, know a bit of Redemptoris Missio, know a bit of what's going on in the world. So look at these things tonight, because they really will make your answers shine. Right. 3-year gap between topics. You get to a point where if there's obvious questions, it might be this year. So that doesn't always work. So, for example, problem of evil, they've never asked John Hick, and that's a massive gap. So they don't always go with the patterns. But I think if a topic hasn't come up in 3 years and there's a very obvious gap, I think it's quite likely. Arguments for Jesus' relationship to God. So that Tallulah is to do with, is Jesus human or is Jesus divine? So check out the teach along, but it's to do with, was Jesus purely human? Was Jesus a hybrid? Don't call him that in your exam. But was Jesus part God, part human, or was Jesus fully God and fully divine? And therefore, what each of those avenues actually says about Jesus, because that talks about the relationship with God. If he was just human, then he had just a human relationship with God. But if he was part design, how much of the future did he know? Did he feel pain on the cross, etc.? Or if he was fully divine, then he had that full connection with God, because he was God made flesh. So that's the discussion that you would have there. They won't repeat the same questions, they might repeat the same topics. So, for example, pluralism and theology came up last year to do with anonymous Christians. You won't get that one again, I very much doubt, but you might get a pluralism question, you might get an exclusivism question. I doubt it though. I think pluralism society is going to come on. I think it's going to be pluralism society, just because a massive area of that topic they haven't asked yet is things like multi-faith societies, but it doesn't mean that it won't possibly be there. The Christians developing new ways of thinking from secularization. What that question is asking is, how has Christianity adapted to secularization, to this increase of atheism, to people questioning faith, maybe people being more agnostic? And so what you would talk about is basically all the adaptations. So the updated documents where the Catholic Church has tried to take on board the changes, how they can retain their tradition, but then also open it up. So you can talk about different denominations. So, for example, how the Methodist Church, the Methodist denomination, has welcomed homosexuality, and so how they've had to adapt to modern society. That's basically what that question is asking. So you could bring in all sorts with that one. Sean Brixton, no, I haven't come across that individual, so you don't have to bring them in, but it might be wider reading, so it sounds great if it is. Should Christianity engage with secular ideologies? Now, that's a very, very good question, Imogen, and it reminds me of one a few years ago. If you read the question and you don't know which topic it falls under, just answer it anyway. So bring in anything that you want. So I remember one year there was a secularization question, but a lot of people answered it as a liberation question. They still got awarded marks when they specifically answered the question that they were asked. So always make sure that whatever you answer, even if you're not sure you're going down the right path, there's no right path. So always link everything you're arguing back to the question. That's the key. If you link it back to the question, they have to give you the marks. That's the key. So even if you come out the exam and everyone goes, oh, I wrote about secularization, and you think, oh my goodness, I wrote about Marxism, it doesn't matter if you answer the question. So yes, with engaging with secular ideologies, certainly talking about Marxism, but you could also talk about general secular ideologies as well. That would be fine. No, you don't have to quote the document, Redemptorism. You don't have to quote the document. No, it looks brilliant if you do. Don't forget, quotes could be 2 or 3 words, but even just mentioning it and knowing what it's about is brilliant. Will moral principles come up? I really hope not. I mean, what is that topic even about? So I really hope that topic doesn't come up. But when it comes to moral principles and your natural and revealed, they might be there, but there's no obvious massive gaps of things they've not asked before. So they might throw one of them in there. I hope not, because often it again is, you do think, what do I actually talk about? What would you do if the question was Christianity should be changed, not abandoned? That's a Ruther versus Daly question. So Ruther thinks that it should be changed. Daly thinks it should be abandoned. Whatever is mentioned first in the question. So, for example, if it says changed, I'd keep Ruther as your structure. So I would think of 3 main parts of Ruther's argument, 3 main parts of Daly's argument, and say which one is better. That's what I would do. And do not forget, Daly, while she's brilliant, Daly's fantastic to talk about in an essay. Keep it constrained. She just talks. I mean, I talk. She talks a lot. She has so much to say, does Daly. You're going to have to keep it very, very tight as far as what you say about Daly. Otherwise, you can end up with a very descriptive answer. And don't forget the things with Daly is she often criticizes things from the Old Testament. Yeah, that's nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus has nothing to do with the Old Testament. So a lot of what she criticizes Christianity for actually is Old Testament rather than the New Testament with Jesus. So it's just a little side thing there. Do I think Ruther and Daly will come up? Potentially. It's a big gap and they weren't on last year. How would you answer? Thank you, Evie, for that one. How would you answer if heaven, hell was an actual place? What it means is it physical? That's what that question means. Is it physical? So therefore, if they're physical places, you discuss where actually are they? Are you then physical when you go? What sort of physical body will you have when you go there? Are you, if you died of a horrible disease, are you then physically like that when you go to the afterlife, or have you got a renewed body, but then is that still the same person as the one who died? Personal identity. So that's what that question's focusing on. Do I think liberation theology will come up? No, because it came up last year, but that is not a great logic to go on. But it did come up last year. They could ask you a question on both gender, society, gender theology, pluralism, society, pluralist theology. They can ask you them. It's very unlikely. Why? Because there are 12 topics that you're painstakingly revising. And therefore, if they ask 2 questions in just 2 areas that link, it's just really unfair. So whilst they could ask you them, very, very unlikely. Very unlikely. Which 4 came up last year? Check the PowerPoint on YouTube that does past questions and gaps. Do I think knowledge of God will come up? I hope not. I don't. There's no obvious gaps. That's why it's not in my predictions. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm understanding about the grades and the marks. But again, it's very, very difficult to be able to predict grades or marks, simply because we don't know how you're all going to perform. So I'm not really following the question there. So I'm not ignoring it. No, the same marker doesn't. Or yes, no, they do. So the same marker will mark all 3 papers, but they mark them as separate answers, so you can use the same cut in all three. You will not be marked down for that. So they mark one, then they'll mark another. So you won't get marked down for that if you do use the same thing. How relevant is current affairs legislation, sociology? I think very relevant. I think that they really make you stand out as a student, knowing these things, giving different examples. It always works with my students with their work when they write something different, when you stand out, you want to stand out. So I think that you don't have to. It's not a requisite of getting the A's and the A stars, but I think it's certainly an easier way of getting in there is by having some examples or legislation or quotes or things like that. So the grades, they get a specific mark scheme. So where the examiners have actually wrote down exactly what they're looking for, give or take in an answer. And don't forget, to be a marker, you have to have been teaching for at least 3 years, which means they have to have the markers have to have a good subject knowledge. So if you do talk about something different, they understand it. But also examiners have the amazing technology of Google. So if you write something, they'll just Google it if they haven't come across it before to see if you're accurate or see if you just made something up. So they have the levels of response, but they also then have the examiner's mark scheme, and that's how they mark it. And it goes. The marking process is very, very thorough to get your marks. The question: Christianity follows where culture leads. Never come across that question before. I don't know what area that would be. I'm not familiar with the question. Yep. Hopefully, that makes more sense. Um, how do you distinguish A's, A star students from B's? Um, Basically, once they've marked all of your answers, so out of 40, each answer's out of 40, they then put all your answers together and they work out basically these students got the top so much percent, these students got the next top. So that's how they work it out. The examiners, when they're marking your answers, aren't thinking, oh, this is an A grade. No, you can't think like that as an examiner. You mark it based on, which band is it in, how much have they talked about, is the line of argument clear? So we never know as markers whether what grade you're going to get. They are not decided until the end, when all the actual marks get put together, all of your 40s, to see actually these are the top performers. That's what then creates the A stars for each paper. Hence why each of your three papers, philosophy, ethics, and DCT, all have different grade boundaries, because it depends on how well students have done. So that's how it works. It's very, very complicated, and so there's no way of predicting it, and there's no way of manipulating the system. What's the likelihood of Augustine coming up? Again, he came up last year. He might come up. Oh, of course. So, Imogen, exclusivism and inclusivism. Exclusivism means that the afterlife, heaven, hell, is exclusive to Christians, that you are saved if you are a Christian. And so it can be a narrow exclusivism, which even means even if you're a Christian, you still might not get into heaven. And that's why people like Augustine come in with God's grace. But then exclusivism is, if you are a Christian, you will be saved. Inclusivism is this idea that you still need to be a Christian, but what about people that never even heard about Jesus? Why should they be punished? And what you've got to think about with inclusivism is that Jesus himself was a Jew. So that means Jesus wouldn't even be in heaven, because Jesus wasn't a Christian. Or people like Moses, Abraham, they weren't Christians, they were Jews. So inclusivism means things like the anonymous Christian, that if you behave like a Christian, but you aren't aware you're a Christian, then you can still have salvation. So that's the difference. Yeah, if you can't remember a name, no big deal. Put their theory, put their thoughts. If you don't remember the name, that does not matter. You will not get marked down for that. It's the points, it's your argument, it's your evaluation that counts. How do I answer a pluralism in society? It depends what the question is. So you would just use it depends what the question is for that one. That's a really, really good question. You won't get necessarily a quote in the question, but they might be specific. You need to know the stories that are referenced in Person of Jesus. They might ask you those. They have asked a sheep and a goats question before, I think maybe in the first year exams. They might be the references that you need to know, the stories you need to know, the texts you need to know, like Redemptoris Missio. They might put it in the question. It won't be what all the question is about, but it'll be in reference to that text. So hence why, again, make sure you do know your different parts of the spec. Spiritual values versus personal values, or spiritual values versus human values. All that means is that what's the difference between Christianity and a religious spiritual value and just the general human values that we have anyway? Is there a difference? Brilliant question, Evie. If you get a Bonhoeffer question, you do not have to go into great historical depth about his background. You can do that very quickly. I imagine if Bonhoeffer does come up, it's going to be of one of his four areas, like discipleship. So therefore, you just need to link it into things like obedience and grace and solidarity. So you don't have to go into great detail historically. Redemptoris Missio is a text, and no, I can't. It's a massive document, so you might just want to have a quick Google of a summary for that one. Yeah, really good question, Liam. Quite often they will put the reference and then what it is as well. I haven't seen questions where they've been specific and not given you also what it is. So if it was the sheep and the goats, they wouldn't just give you the reference. They would say the sheep and the goats. They wouldn't just give you the biblical reference and expect you to know it. They might if they were going to be really mean, but that's just really mean. So I doubt it. No, they'll always give you the reference and whatever it is that they want you to talk about. Don't have time for going over natural and revealed. Izzy, just check out the teach along on YouTube. Christian ethics distinctive. What all that means is it something separate? Is it something important? Is it different from normal values? Do they provide anything of significance separately as Christianity? That's all that means. What if it's a topic with hardly any scholars? You don't get marks specifically for scholars. You can get marks for scholarly views or academic ideas. So you could get that for Bible references. So if you don't have a lot of names, use Jesus a lot, use the Bible a lot, you'll get marks there. Jesus is still a name. So also maybe have a look at some names that you could use in different topics. That's the brilliant thing with DCT, is you can talk about pretty much anything and everything. Problem of evil often comes in, nature of God often comes in. Use the topics and the knowledge that you've got to bring it all together. Judgment question, Lazarus and sheep and goats, and then where you would go after judgment. Do you go to purgatory, heaven, hell? That's what I would discuss with that one. Well, Ruther, she does talk about wisdom, yes, but obviously she says a lot about wisdom. She says a lot about Jesus being, so she's got wisdom, she's got Jesus as the servant king rather than as a warrior. So there is quite a lot of Ruther. Again, check the teach along, because there's so much to say for Ruther. She does have her own video. So there is quite a lot. It's just breaking it down into different points and arguments. Malera's dignitism is not vital, it just makes you look good. Can you get full marks without scholarly sources or wisdom? Your argument would have to be brilliant. Your argument, it's a bit like having somebody on the stand and not calling any witnesses. It would have to be pretty brilliant. But it's not, I've seen it before, but it's very hard. Family entirely culturally determined. That's to do with how Christianity has influenced the family. You can talk about traditional families. You can talk about mixed families and how the family dynamic and the family view has been affected over the years. So how Christianity, what the traditional family looks like within Christianity, and therefore how it's maybe adapted towards society. Helen Tillett, yes, brilliant. Um, limited election. Limited election is that it's for Christians, but it's limited to which Christians. Unlimited is um, unlimited to everyone. No, hang on a minute. Limited, yeah, limited is to Christians. Unlimited is to everyone, but again, you have to be Christians. Universalism means everybody, doesn't matter what faith you're in. So unlimited gives the idea that it's for everyone, but actually you still have to be a Christian. Limited means you have to be a Christian, and sometimes it may be even more narrow to specific Christians as well for that one. Yep, Dante is a really good uh, idea to throw in there. Hmm. How do you strengthen your evaluation? That's a really good question. You have to just be really convincing. As far as I know, that's not particularly helpful. But it's a bit like anything in an argument. How do you win an argument? Strength is by providing evidence as to why that point works. Why is it justified? Imagine that I'm reading your essay as you're writing it tomorrow. God forbid that you've got my voice in your head, but everything you're writing, I'm asking why are you putting that? Why is it reliable? Why is it this? Why is it that? Why is it convincing? And then you really have to justify it. That's how you strengthen your argument. Dante talks about hell, but it's not. It's just a side thing. You don't have to know Dante, so don't panic. Or they always do. The examiners always take into account that you're under high amounts of stress. So, hence why I always give the same example. Years ago, when I was marking for the exam board, a student wrote an Aristotle answer, but the whole way through they called them Aquinas. The whole way through, the answer was still fantastic. The answer still for Aristotle was brilliant. I did not mark them down because they called them Aquinas. So the examiners remember that you are under tight time constraints. It's your last exam for most of you. You've had a massive amount to learn. You've got 12 topics. You're under exam conditions and pressure. They take that into consideration. Yeah. Sorry, Blaze, the daily question is just a bit of a big question to answer. That would take me a while to talk about that. Unitary pluralist, not come across that phrase before. Pluralism society, yep. Scriptural reasoning, multi-faith, redemptorist missio, yep. That's pretty much the main themes. Talk about hell, linking it to the Bible. So there's obviously a couple of passages in the Bible, and just the belief that it's Augustine. Augustine was. We can thank him for these ideas of hell and the torturous punishment. You can also talk a little bit about Marxism if you want to, because obviously hell was created really as a construct to keep society working hard, because you'll be rewarded in afterlife, and if you don't, you don't want to, risk going to hell. Yeah, if you need to drop one topic, yeah, yeah, gnashing of teeth. Yeah, it's a good one. Is that one? Secularization question example again. Check all the past questions on the other available PowerPoints. They'll help you with that. Predictions are on YouTube and social media. Yep, you can link in natural law, teleological, absolutely. Predictions. I've said person of Jesus. I can't even remember now. Um, person of Jesus, death and afterlife, pluralism and society, and I know potentially Bonhoeffer, potentially gender and theology, but there was another one that was seemed more likely, secularization. So those are the ones I think are maybe more likely. Yeah, wise man is a great one. So yeah, you can use that to other topics as well. So use Hume. Hume is a good critic to use. Yes, the same topic has come on. Bonhoeffer was asked, the same topic for Bonhoeffer obviously was asked, I think 3 or 4 years running. So yeah, you can ask the same ones. Jesus never actually called himself the Son directly. People called him the Son of God. He called God Father. So he never actually really spoke of himself as divine. He always said that God was working through him. He never took credit for the miracles that he did or anything like that. So, and obviously, he died on the cross. He was in pain. So that's where you can question the connection with God. No, Pale is in teleological in philosophy, but it links with natural knowledge of God. Yeah, 3 years in a row was Bonhoeffer. Yeah, well found. Yeah, he was the Son of Man, correct. Any mention of John Paul II, great. Drop him in wherever you can. He's always saying things. Simone de Beauvoir links well into society. Markers will already be marking your philosophy already. So they start pretty much straight away. I don't know if they're going to be mean or not. Like I said, I didn't think the ethics paper was that mean, but it's swings and roundabouts as to what people think is mean and isn't mean. Yeah, elect and predestined, they work as pretty much the same because it means that God has still chosen you. So yes, motherhood could come up. Yeah, if you accidentally write a gender and theology instead of a gender and society, then again, just make sure everything is linked back to the question and you're fine. So make sure everything is linked back and therefore you'll get the marks for it. No, you don't need to know the difference between 3 waves of feminism. No. Mia, I don't know what they are. So no, you don't need to know them because I don't know what they are. So again, how can you tell the difference in the questions? The way that you can tell the difference in the questions is they'll often have trigger things in it that will tell you. So sometimes they just blatantly say Mary Daly. Sometimes they will say anonymous Christian, and therefore it's clear which topics it falls under. Sometimes they might ask them, such as Christianity and gender. And so therefore you think, is it a society? Is it a theology? But quite often they will give signals within their answers as to which topic it is. So don't worry too much about that. Again, look at all the past questions on the other PowerPoint. Could you work out what topics they were part of? Can you see the buzzwords that they use? No, you won't lose marks if you use the wrong Bible passage. Yes, you can absolutely talk about somebody that you've learned in things like sociology, because again, if the examiners haven't come across it, they'll just Google it. So yes, bring in knowledge from psychology, sociology, absolutely fine. Distinctive human nature. Um, Yeah, are we corrupted by sin? And therefore, and then you just look at the strengths and weaknesses of how we are similarly present in Adam and Eve, how we are corrupted by sin. If this is our nature, obviously Aquinas says it's not. We lead towards good rather than evil. Augustine says it's evil before good. So you just discuss the different parts of it and how we need to be saved by God's grace. No, if you forget a scholar, you won't lose marks. You don't have to put the exact gospel if you're using a Bible quote. If you remember it, brilliant. If you can't remember the reference, don't worry. If you can remember what book it's in, great. If you can't, don't worry. Blaze, I don't think it matters either way. I think if you put the wrong scholar or don't mention one at all, neither one will mark you down. But so it's probably if you're not, because if you're not sure, but then you might be right. So sometimes it is worth putting it in just in case. Oh yeah, anything where you can bring synderesis in as well. The idea of us leaning towards goodness, that's always a great link. And I really like Aquinas's conscience as well. This idea of vincible and invincible ignorance. So this is why we do bad things, etc. Secularization could be primarily focused on Dawkins, yes. No, you couldn't. You wouldn't be asked about the Augustine specifically about the Synod of Jerusalem. No. How would you do a purgatory? Well, you'd look at the different denominations and whether they believe purgatory exists. So, for example, Protestants don't believe purgatory exists. It's not in the Bible. What's the benefit of it? Who goes to it? How does it link to heaven and hell? So that would be what you'd answer there. How much should you focus on the text? You don't have to focus that much on a text. You could have it just the theme of a paragraph. If it's in the question, I would just spot it in your answer. So I would just bring it in your answer as and where you can if it's mentioned in the question. Freud versus Dawkins, probably not because they're kind of same team. So they might do Freud and Dawkins. Doubt it. They'd either do Freud or Dawkins, I think. If they wanted Freud and Dawkins, they'd just ask a general question. There's no absolute necessary main scholars for those areas, no. If it's a pluralism and society question, it depends on the question itself, but I wouldn't cross-contaminate. If they ask for a pluralism and society, you don't have to talk about pluralism and theology. So I wouldn't bring in, unless you really need to bring in parts from other topics, you don't have to. I wouldn't bring in other areas if you don't need to, unless it's part of your argument, part of your question, etc. Yeah, you could ask one about the sheep and the goats. Can we just hold off on the individual comments now, folks, please? Because I'm finding it very hard to navigate and I'll just start cutting you off. So yeah, just talk to each other on separate medias, just because if I find it difficult to navigate your comments otherwise. Yeah, Freud snapped it into Rena. That sounds great. That would work really well. Phenomenological knowledge, you don't have to know that. No, that would be just a really good extra thing. Thank you very much. You're very kind. Are there Bible quotes that would fit not only one topic? Most of them, I think, you could make link to other areas. So, for example, if you have a quote to do with one of Jesus's miracles, I think that would link into lots of different areas. So maybe tonight, just find 2 or 3 quotes that you could link in. But something in Jesus you could link into Bonhoeffer, who's inspired by Jesus, linked into pluralism. You could even link it into gender. So I think that there's a lot of Bible quotes you could link into multiple areas. Yeah, brilliant. This idea of heaven and hell verifiable in principle, spotted by Hick. Wonderful. That's a brilliant link. Real, spiritual doesn't exist. That would be a brilliant argument. Pluralism and theology, salvation types. Yep. No, I think that would work. That would work within that question, definitely. Celestial teapot, is that the Bertrand Russell idea that we can Bertrand Russell, basically a lot of what Dawkins says, he copies it off Bertrand Russell. The celestial teapot is the idea that we can't prove there isn't a teapot floating in space, but we all assume there isn't. And so he's using that same argument to say we know that the tooth fairy doesn't exist or the Easter bunny, so we should also realize that God doesn't exist. So that's the celestial teapot, is we can't prove it isn't floating around in space, but we also know it isn't. And he uses that same logic to prove against God. Any quotes for any tips for remembering quotes? Write them on a little piece of paper and just keep repeating them. Cover them over. How much can you remember? Go back to it. Cover it over. So I always put things on separate pieces. Quite often as well, don't go into your exam with it. But if you actually write things on your hand and then wash your hand off, it's kind of like it's ingrained in your hand and you kind of remember it. Wash your hands though, please don't cheat. But it's finding a different way of putting the information down, and it'll stay in your mind more. I also saw something that if you are trying to learn something, doodle with the other hand, and it helps your brain connect with what you're revising more. Don't know if that's true. Last minute topics to go over. No, death and afterlife. There's a lot of gaps in that one. I'll be very surprised if death and afterlife don't come on. Know at least one of your pluralisms and one of your genders, because at least then you can merge them across. And I would say just know your text, know something from John Paul II, know something from Redemptoris Missio, know something from Malleus Dignitatem, know something from a couple of quotes from the Bible, because at least then you can put something into an answer. Yeah, liberation is Marxism with Christianity. Yeah. How many points do you try and get into an argument? I'd say three main arguments, three main points. As long as you can have as many as you want, as long as you argue something, have a really clear vein of argument, and you will get a lot of marks. This one is the hardest one to argue. So if you can actually really argue something, you will immediately move up. Heaven and hell being physical, they could ask them on their own or they could ask them together. Yeah, they definitely could merge them. Absolutely. Learning some stats, the census, yes, that's yeah, that's really good. Don't forget, I don't know if the updated census, obviously one of my PowerPoints, the old one. I don't know if, because they do it every few years, so they might even be updated statistics. Bonhoeffer was definitely not a secularist, he was a devout Christian. Yes, you can still get high marks if you don't use quotes, absolutely. Book of Revelation, fabulous. Yep, bring that one in. That's brilliant. Absolutely. If you talk about 1 Corinthians for purgatory, fabulous. All of these things are so good, everyone. So good. Did Aquinas support heaven as a state or as a physical place? I don't know. I don't think Aquinas ever talked about it as being a physical place. I think Aquinas talked about it as a state. Obviously, Aquinas talks more about the beatific vision being face to face with God. So it depends how you wish to interpret that. But I don't think he's ever actually said specifically what he thinks. He just talks about the beatific vision. Can you talk about from an atheist point of view? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can talk about from an atheist point of view, an agnostic, as long as, again, you are always fair to the other side and you recognize that to an extent the other side might be, have value or worth, you can definitely argue it on an atheist perspective. Yep. The point, explain, respond, evaluate, link back is good. For me, my only issue, because I don't stick with any of the pearls, perils, whatever they are. I don't teach with them because I find them too restrictive. My only issue with that is the link back. What that means is you might have massive long paragraphs, and then the only link you have back to the question is the last part, like it's crowbarred in at the end of your paragraphs. The link back should be throughout. That's just my personal opinion from reading essays. Yeah, I think death and afterlife's possibility. Yeah, absolutely. Miracles is one of the main arguments to support Jesus as the Son of God, that he was able to do miracles. Yeah. You could get questioned on a specific verse, but it would be within an umbrella question. So they might ask you to pick out a specific verse, but it'll probably be something to do with miracles, for example. And therefore, if it's a question on miracles, that again means is God human or divine? So if there's a question on miracles and a verse there, 3 or 4 paragraphs depends on the length of them. So 3 or 4 is absolutely fine. It purely depends on your own style. Lazarus and Rich Man definitely know that story. It's very good for judgment and afterlife and heaven hell separation. That one's an important one. It's easy as well. It's an easy one to know. Hi, Zach. You having withdrawals already, Zach? You're having withdrawals. I need to be opening that bottle of wine you bought me. What day is it today? It's Wednesday. Oh, I can have a wine on a Wednesday, can't I? Beatific vision is heaven, face to face with God in heaven. The Imogen, the way to get good marks tomorrow is, like I said, there's two main things. I can't help specifically with, there's no specific formula to getting really good marks. The main two things is have an argument. If you have an argument, they will have to give you the marks. They need to see an argument. And then the second one is they need to see that everything is linked to the question. Is it clear why you're bringing and why you're talking about the things? The rest is up to you. The rest is whatever you want to bring in and whatever else you can bring in. But those are, if you do those two things, you are guaranteed, decent marks. Two big paragraphs, Ruther and Daly, as in one on Ruther and one on Daly, they'd be massive. Don't forget as well, everyone, the paragraph system is to make it easier for your examiners to read it as well. So, as I said to you in a previous one, you might be the last paper they're marking at 11 o'clock at night after a full day of teaching, and they open the paper and they've just got this mass of Ruther and mass of Daly, and it's like wading through treacle. Paragraphs and clear themes just make it easier to follow. Think about reading a book with no chapters. That's what your paragraphs are, they're chapters. So it basically just makes it much easier for an examiner to read if you have paragraphs. Yeah, if you only write two big paragraphs, it's fine. It's just again, these are only my suggestions. When judgment will come, so that would be, yes, straight to hell, purgatory. Is it the end of days? Um, will all of the dead be raised together? That sort of thing. Yes, so unique as Son of God. Is he unique as in, is he more than human? um, the Augustine's childhood. Yes, Augustine would be such an interesting individual to look into his childhood. I mean, you certainly could criticize him for that because Augustine was actually, the life and soul of the party until his mother took his mistress off him, and then it all went downhill from there. I can't have my mistress, I'm spitting my dummy out, so nobody else can have sex either. So, yeah, you can criticize him from where he got his arguments from, but obviously don't psychoanalyze him and Freudian him too much. Yes, you could get two questions on the same unit. Very, very unlikely, though. Pairs to pigs. The which question would I recommend you're not doing? It's total preference. Like I would avoid natural and revealed. I would evolve moral principles, but that's just my personal opinion. Whereas I love liberation theology. I love Bonhoeffer. Some of you will hate them topics. So it's pure preference. No, I think, Amelia, you can say that it was self projection, that because he saw it in this way and he behaved in this way, that therefore everybody. So you can argue it's reductionist, can't you? That he reduces everyone else's behavior down to his own. That's pretty clever. Yeah, you can skip a topic. You just have to know everything else just in case. So, like I said, you don't have to know both your pluralisms now, both your genders now. Um, you haven't got time. So, yeah, you can start narrowing things down. Marx didn't believe in Christianity, but that's blurring your yeah, that's blurring your pluralisms a little bit. So yeah, Marx believed that Christianity was manipulated by society, and that obviously Marx went after the people in business and people in charge and in power and believes that they used it as a way to manipulate people. Yeah, less content means you can evaluate it more. Definitely. No, as I said, it's the content that you actually know now that's important, not how much you know, but what content you know. So knowing, as I said, your texts, your quotes, etc. Yeah, you do need good AO1, but I've AO1 is only 16 marks, AO2 is 24 marks. I've read essays with very little description and just masses of argument, but you can't really argue something without bringing in description at the same time to make your argument make sense. So don't distinguish your AO1 to your AO2 because you will naturally, if you are arguing something, bring in your AO1 at the same time. Yeah, you could talk about Daly's Trinity in one paragraph with Ruther. With Ruther, you could do that. I wouldn't do all of it in mass detail. So yeah, unless there was a question, I think the last Daily question that was asked was about the Trinity. I might be wrong though. So therefore, you'd have to talk about it in detail. But if you do just want to mention it and link it to Ruther, that would work well. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, Gutierrez, Boff and Boff, know your names. That's the main thing for liberation theology. It's quite a hard one to be doing at this time of night as well. Liberation is probably one of the trickiest ones because it depends if you do sociology and how much you know Marxism already. Again, if you want to see types of questions, look to the previous questions that have been asked or my predictions. Imogen, that would be purely based on your interpretation. If beatific vision is an actual state, whether when Aquinas talks about face to face, you have to interpret and look at the different interpretations of whether that means physically face to face or spiritually face to face, renewed body face to face. That's your job. That's what the essay is about. AO2 is your evaluation. Anything to do with any of your critical words, convincing, logical, credible, valid, strong, weak, where you justify your key word, your critical word, sorry, and then you counter it. However, to an extent, this doesn't work, but then it does work. So your AO2, again, is like having someone on the stand that you're questioning. So you're questioning that argument doesn't work. What about this argument? Can we bring in this witness? But this doesn't. It's about looking at whether, so Dawkins himself says that it's like the tooth fairy. That isn't a valuation. You're just using someone else's argument. You need to say whether that's good or bad. Like, I think that's really unfair, and I would therefore argue that. So that's, and then you would counter it. What would Dawkins maybe defend himself by saying? Who would maybe defend him? So it is like the table tennis. It's the backwards and forwards. What evidence can you use to say Christianity should be part or not part of public life? Um, that's linked in things with the fact that we are a Church of England country, that things to do with our money systems, banking, um, a lot of the House of our Parliament has people from different faiths, many Christianity. So you would talk about removing that from society. What society would therefore look like? Introduction should be short, 4 to 6 lines. It should be short. All you're doing is basically outlining what the question is asking, what your line of argument is, then you get straight on into your argument. When evaluating, how many times until you run out, until you get bored, or until you think, oh, I need to move on. So you could go backwards and forwards as many times as you want. And then you don't need to do so many more paragraphs if you've really gone into depth in one. They like that. Darby Allin, I've not come across, so I would say again, you can mention them. I don't know how they're linked, but it doesn't mean that they are very relevant. So yes. Conclusion, again, conclusion's about 4 to 6 lines. Even if it's just a line, that's better than nothing. But 4 to 6 lines is where you do a brief summary of all the key bits and you really push in the boot. Don't forget, it's the last thing the examiners read from you, so you want to leave them with that real lasting impression. You don't necessarily get marked down, but you'll struggle to get into the real top bands because you've not ended your essay. It's like not finishing a book off. So you aren't going to be marked down significantly, but it's just, even if it's one sentence, it shows control over time. I would say it's better just to round off your argument quicker to do a conclusion than just to leave your conclusion. But again, that's my opinion. Do I think anything from last year's exam will come up? I hope not. It could do. Daily versus Ruth. I'd pick 3 themes in each of them and use them against each other. Yep, you can miss out liberation theology, but you need to know the rest of them. Conclusion, don't add new ideas. No, don't add new ideas. You're just summarising the main things that you've brought up. Yeah, no, don't don't listen to me solely though. I'm not as confident with DCT as I was the others. DCT, because the examiners do deliberately do curveballs in this one, I might be wrong. So don't yeah. This is one where you do need to know pretty much a bit of everything, but you can bring in so much from different areas. But thank you for your confidence in me. Yeah, you could be asked humanism. So humanism is just kind of an atheistic standpoint that removes itself from religion. So that's all humanism is. But again, there's 2 or 3 slides on that one on the PowerPoint. So just check the teach along. I would never take a middle ground, Amelia, but that's just my opinion. Um, think about your conclusion again, like a lawyer summarising it to a jury. If he just went down the middle ground, the jury would be like, well, are they guilty or not guilty then? Where do I go? For me, it's much better to have a really strong argument. So I wouldn't finish in the middle ground. You can always say to an extent it has value, but overall it's cripplingly obvious it's not good. We've only got a few more minutes left, everyone, so please get in any final questions that you've got. I don't see why not, using Augustine's pear story as a metaphor. Yeah, clever interpretation. Social secularism and social atheism. I would say that atheism is actually, I see atheism as still a religious perspective, because you're still arguing a view on God. You're just arguing a view that God doesn't exist. Secularization just removes religion from it completely. So I'd say secular atheism is more of someone that's still involved in the thoughts and has thought about, does God exist or not? Whereas secularization just removes God from the picture completely. But that's more my opinion on those. Least likely, not. I'm really not sure. Only women can develop a full spirituality. I'm not sure, Daniel, if you mean Mary Daly's argument there. Yes, you can bring in your logicals into nature and knowledge of God. Lovely. Thank you, Rama. It's no problem. How much ping ponging? Again, as much as you can, until it starts to kind of dry up as far as your arguments, or you feel like you're going around in circles. Always making it clear, though, which side is still more convincing when you are doing this. So the examiner's not thinking, oh, are we for, are we against, for, against? Make sure it's very clear that this, the argument against is still stronger than the arguments for. So do it as much as you can while you've still got arguments. Because that's where you get a lot of marks, where you get a lot of marks for the ping ponging, but always make it clear how it's relevant to the question and what your line of argument is. Gender roles and Christianity, you can use Daly and Ruthie. Yes, that's fine. Is repetition marked down? Not really. Students might this unless you repeat the exact same argument twice. But if you're using the words in the question, you might feel like you're repeating yourself, but actually you're not. You're just answering the question. So that works really well. I know this is the last one. You're all gonna have withdrawal symptoms. What am I gonna do on a night than answer all your questions? You guys would do so much better than me. You really would. You know this so well, and you have flair and creativity, and you can see things. So the examiners don't want to read things from me. Definitely not. No, they really what you can, your insights that you can have. This is exactly what they want. I remember one year, I don't know if it was last year, someone actually bribed me and they said, "How much can I pay you to sit my exam?" And I said, I don't think even if you could afford me that I would get away with sitting your exam for you. Again, philosophy and ethics were nice papers. It's totally subjective. You found the papers nice, which is brill. Other people didn't, so it doesn't mean this paper's going to be awful, because it's also subjective. It really is. But you might get a reference in the question, talk about this in the question as a whole. I don't think the wording's going to be that tricky, but they did a curveball in ethics. I've never seen them use that language before, so it might happen again. Yeah, no, it's been a long road for you all. It really has. It's been a long time revising, a long time preparing for this. Just think tomorrow, at what is it, 9 o'clock, 10, 11, like 11:15 in morning, most of you are free. It's done. You've finished. How wonderful is that going to feel? You can merge them. I wouldn't necessarily, Cora, I wouldn't necessarily merge them if you don't need to, though. If it asks for pluralism in society, the examiners have split the topics for a reason. If they wanted you to merge them, they'd have merged them for you. They have pluralism and society and pluralism and theology because they want you to talk about them separately. You can bring little bits across, that's fine, but I wouldn't merge them. If they wanted you to merge them, they'd have merged them for you. But again, that's just my opinion. No problem at all. Same people write every paper. No, we have different teams for different papers. different markers for different papers. No problem at all. Do I think overall ethics was done well? I think students had to step up for it. I think students did well from what I've heard, but I think it was tricky, and the questions will have caught some students out. India judgment immediately after death or end of time. There's no answer for that. That's will be part of your discussion. So that's what you would discuss and look into. I used to be a marker. I'm not anymore. I with criminology, I do enough marking now. So yeah, I don't mark for OCR anymore. I spend enough time behind a computer, so I haven't marked for them for a few years, but I have in the past. It's very tedious and marking the same answers over and over and over again. It takes a lot. What have I planned for the rest of the evening? Probably sitting in my chair and not moving for a little bit. Or I was watching though the first Omen, the horror film. So I'm going to go and see if that's any good with my evening. Tips for when you run out of things to write in an essay, move on to the next essay, leave yourself a gap, and then think about, right, is there anything I really wanted to get into one of my answers? How can I now get it into an answer? That's what I would do. So if you do run out of things to say, then move on to your next question, leaving some space in case you do think of something else. And then I often find if you go back after you've written another answer, read your answer that you've already done, you might think, oh gosh, I haven't mentioned that and I was meant to. So that's a good thing if you run out of things to say. Yeah, you can gain a lot of AO2 with not a lot of AO1, definitely. Oh, good. Good. I'm pleased it's good. Kathala, I definitely, you hear you doing the work, you're going to get more than an E, don't worry. Or orthodoxy versus orthopraxy, and then we'll round it off because you guys ask me questions all night. Orthodoxy versus orthopraxy, one of my favorite things. I would talk about this. I talk about this in every topic. My lower six, I talk about this with them, and they always get fed up. And it's brilliant, I think, for Jesus and for Bonhoeffer. Orthodoxy with a D is when you basically just always talk about scripture and the Bible and theologians and things. Orthopraxy with a P is practicing what you preach. It's not just saying, oh, the Bible says this, but they're not acting upon it. Orthopraxy is about practicing what you preach, actually putting into action in your life what you believe, just like Bonhoeffer did, just like Jesus did. So it's basically like a bacon eating vegetarian. Be a vegetarian, but they don't practice what they preach. No, you've got to practice or orthopraxy what you preach. So they're really nice links when talking about people like Bonhoeffer, for example. Yeah, that's a really nice link, actually, Daniel, with cheap and costly gifts. That's very clever. Yeah, very nice. I haven't seen that link before, but yes, no, that's definitely spot on. More papers, good. Wrong number, it's no big deal. Yeah, orthopraxy, like Bonhoeffer, absolutely. Yep, you can still get a good mark for that, Hannah. Absolutely. They want evaluation. You will know enough at this stage. You've revised enough. You've studied the topics. You know enough. And you know enough from your other areas as well that you'll be able to get in enough AO1 to get your marks. How is it to get an A? Not that easy. And yes, I do have a TikTok as of about 3 weeks ago. So yeah, and it's all under the same name. So you'll find me all there. Right, folks. I'm done. I need to caffeinate and then watch my film. Good luck with your revision tonight. Don't forget, don't bombard yourself with information now. Keep with your key texts, keep with your find a couple of quotes, make sure you know your Bible references, and just have a rest, and then just show off tomorrow. Just literally get your brain on that paper, answer the question, and argue, 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 argue. Why? Just argue. I know you can do this. It's the final one. You are so welcome, everyone. You really are. It's my pleasure. I do. I really enjoy doing these and helping you all, and hearing your really good questions and contributions. So yeah, you're more than welcome. And don't forget, I will be available. Just let me have a brain break first, but I will be available on the comments on YouTube, on TikTok for any further questions that you've got. So just keep in touch if you do have any final burning questions or ones that I weren't able to answer or see. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening, and just have a little break as well. Right, bye everyone. Oh, you are lovely, everyone. Thank you.